America, Hugh Hewitt, joined now by Admiral James Stavridis. He is retired United States Navy, former head of Southern Command, former Allied Supreme Commander of NATO. Good morning, Admiral. How are you and everyone in the Stavridis clan?
We're doing well down in Florida, Hugh, and we're going to find out over the next day or so, I think, what our governor is going to decide about reopening the state. So stay tuned to Florida.
All right. Now, I wanted to get your opinion. I consider you really more balanced than most on most issues. Here's what we've got. We've got inputs coming in, which I'm sure you're monitoring from public health authorities and economic experts. Those inputs combine into public policy choices, which are in front of every decision maker, which must then, at least in the United States, be assessed and acted on by political institutions. And the spectrum of choices is from lockdown to the Sweden model. What's your opinion of what we ought to do based upon what you know today?
Well, first of all, we should recognize that what we've got here in the United States is not one big economy. We've got 50 economies, 50 states. They have different demographics. They have different culture. They almost have different language. Talk to people in South Florida and North Florida have very different cultures and languages, for example. But here's the point, Hugh. In each of these localities, you've got to think of it not as an on and off switch that you only get two choices, lockdown or let it rip. You got to think of it as a rheostat. And I think you got to impose a lot of trust in the governors. And, someone like Brian Kemp, just north of us in Georgia, he's putting that dial pretty far over there toward the open it up category. And in New York and California, you see governors that are dialing it in the opposite direction. And by the way, that might sound a little partisan, but let's look at Massachusetts, where a Republican governor, Charlie Baker, has dialed it pretty much toward the keep it closed category. So I am going to trust the governors to find the right setting on the switch, which again is not an on and off switch. It's like the dimmer, the rheostat in your dining room, and find the balance between shutting it down, which is going to keep people the safest medically, but opening it up, which is going to keep people the safest economically. And I feel that dial, I'll close on this, I feel that dial is turning toward needing to open more.
Well, I'm actually accelerating my dial up, and I'll tell you why. I see that we've got 4.4% of the world's population in the United States, and we have 1 million cases. I assume, and the public health authorities can shoot me down, that whatever case prevalence we have will in fact be repeated around the world. We're the best case because we're actually the most educated, the best informed population anywhere in the world with a free press to communicate.
And highly mobile.
Highly mobile. So the world's going to get to where we are. If we've got 1 million cases, the world's going to have at least 25 million cases within a couple of months. And eventually, we're all going to do Sweden. The Wall Street Journal this morning has an editorial, Germany's RO coronavirus experiment. It's failing. They can't keep the R under 1, or the R naught under 1. And there's a New York Times article about airborne coronavirus from an article in Nature suggesting that the virus stays in the air for 2 hours. Then you've got, Admiral, this is a real caution for CEOs on earnings call. You've got the Ford CEO saying there is no future. I'm sure what he meant to say is he can't tell you how many cars he's going to be selling, but it sounds like some Mad Max dystopia. How do you process all of this into other than, que sera, sera, we're going to all have to go back to work?
I think there's a midpoint here, Hugh, and it's kind of what we're seeing right now in the debate for the Congress about whether to come back and go back to work. And,
yep.
Part of me says, I want my elected officials to come and deal with this. On the other hand, I'm not sure I want to have the Congress of the United States be its own projectile launching into a Sweden-like situation for all the obvious reasons. So how about this? Let's explore more the telecommunication option, but let's think in terms of 30 days, 45 days. I think that's still a reasonable approach. And by the way, let's not forget what was so important 30 days ago in this conversation, which is flatten the curve. In other words, eventually, you're probably right. We're going to have whatever the incidence is going to be, 20%, 30%, 40% infection rate. But we got to deal with the mortality rate at the end of the day, and we can't let the medical system be overwhelmed. I think we've done a reasonably good job of that. Now's the time, as you and I are discussing, to kind of crack open the switch a little bit further and see what's going to happen. Best test case out there, I think, is going to be Georgia, frankly. Let's see what that looks like 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now.
Let's see, we've got a fascinating situation with federalism, and it's our strength, is that we're going to get a bunch of experiments run on the ground. Doug Ducey's Arizona, Charlie Baker's Massachusetts, Gretchen Whitmer's Michigan, and of course Ron DeSantis' Florida, and Brian Kemp's Georgia. We'll get a lot of data in, but I'm looking at the reality, Admiral, and last time I'll make a run at this. Mitch McConnell's calling the senators back because they have to actually debate the most important piece of legislation of my lifetime. It's going to impact structural federalism. They've got to decide what to do vis-a-vis the states who have just run into the wall, right? The states that are dependent upon income tax, sales tax, capital gains tax, like California, are out of money. Florida, not so much. They've got to do something, but what they do will be transcendent in its importance for the constitutional structure of America. So Mitch is calling them back. I'm all for that. I just think that we've done 45 days of this, and I've been 100% supportive. I think by the end of May, we have to be at Sweden. Do you agree or disagree?
I think we're in rough agreement, and what I've been saying to people is Memorial Day. So I think that's probably about right, just in terms of the psychology of the country. And also, Hugh, because by Memorial Day, we're going to have so much more data. We're going to know whether or not it does make sense to really open up, or if we need another 30 days, or whether we say, you know what, 30 days isn't going to make that big a difference. It's time to just open this thing up. So I'm going to put down a marker, and you and I can have that conversation in 5 weeks, that it is probably going to make sense to really start opening those taps at Memorial Day. And there's something symbolic about that as well.
I'm also going to reserve the right to change my mind if a therapeutic arrives. If a therapeutic emerges that works and is efficacious and just needs to scale, then you tell everyone to shelter in place until we can scale the therapeutic, right?
Completely agree with that. And that's also part of we're going to know a lot more in 45 days, because the medical train is zipping along. And I'm participating in a number of efforts, both on that therapeutic side and longer term on the vaccine side. And by the way, back to, is this going to be dystopian? No, because we are going to find a vaccine. This is not some pathogen that arrived from the planet Zorp. We know what this thing is. We know how to create the vaccine. I think those efforts are accelerating. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it is not a train rushing at us. It is us turning on the light switch of vaccines. So let's bear that in mind.
I agree. That's why I would caution CEOs against going all dystopian like Ford's CEO. Yes, there is no future. Honest to goodness. Of course there's a future. Now, Admiral, I want to switch to the Navy very quickly. Interesting story in Breaking Defense yesterday that the Navy either today or tomorrow will award the frigate contract. How important is that? Who do you think's going to win?
I'll stay out of who's going to win, but I will say this. It is a crucial but underappreciated contract as follows. Frigates, as you and I have talked about a couple of times, are kind of the eyes of the fleet, the light cavalry, the smaller, less expensive ship that can get out there and move that network of lethality over distance. And those frigates also can be produced in numbers that get us up to 355 and beyond, which, as we've talked about, we truly need. And last point on this, the frigates in this modern era, they don't have to be big, huge ships to carry a great deal of both sensors and lethal offensive systems. So I think it's a major contract for the Navy. I think the surface Navy is looking very much for this to rejuvenate a kind of a difficult period coming out of the littoral combat ship. We need to get back to the frigate mentality. I think this is going to be a very important contract, both for the Navy and for the nation.
Let me emphasize that Senator Cotton said yesterday our defense industrial base, overlooked story, has been badly hit and shuttered by the virus, as has every industry. We need a big contract that can produce a lot of whatever we're getting that's a high profile, very potent weapon. I think the frigate, I don't know anything about which one to buy. I know they have a lot of punch, they have hypersonic capability and missile tubes and stuff like that. But they're little and they're nimble, and I think they're 100 million piece. We can buy a lot of them, I think. And eventually we can go 20, 40, 60, 80 of these, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's the whole theory here. And for years, we have been looking at other nations that are producing some pretty good smaller ships, some of them with Aegis-like air defense capability at numbers cost-wise that are much below what we're producing here. So we need to get some of that into the industrial base. And I would put our yards, broadly speaking, Huntington Ingalls, General Dynamics, all of them are highly capable, know what they're doing. Bath Iron Works, all very capable of producing this kind of ship in numbers. And then, again, Hugh, the whole key here is that the weapon systems and the sensors have now miniaturized using new, even nanotechnologies in ways that are going to make these very potent ships.
Now, this is a big deal, and if Congress is smart in this phase forward, they'll buy a lot of them. They'll forward appropriate, and they'll buy a lot of these, of the Columbia class. They'll buy a lot of the B-21s. They've got to get the defense industrial base at 30 seconds, G. Admiral. They've just got to spend to make sure that that does not lose its workforce.
That's exactly right, because you can't reinvent that. When those mechanics, those high-pressure welders, those planners who put these complex ships of war together, when they move away and get out of that industry, you're not going to draw them back. It's a crucial part of national security.
Admiral James Stavridis, always a pleasure. Follow him at admiralstav.com, admiralstav.com, or follow him on Twitter, Stavridis J.